Hey, Jack, you're live.
Welcome to the chat of New Bedford Light. Tonight we have an exciting program with three guests from the Vocational Education Justice Coalition. The coalition is a group of 20 nonprofits and unions that have filed a legal complaint with the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education, alleging that protected classes, specifically people of color, English language learners, disabled students, and low-income students are being discriminated in the admissions policies of the Massachusetts Regional Vocational Schools. So we have tonight Renee Ledbetter of United Interfaith Action of Southeastern Massachusetts. Renee is also the president of New Bedford, NAACP New Bedford, and the director of the Shannon Grant of the North Star Learning Centers. We also have Paul Weckstein, co-director of the Center for Law and Education, and Dan French, president of Citizens for Public Schools. Welcome all.
Thank you.
So I thought we would start off by talking about why you filed the complaint. How long has this been a problem in Massachusetts, and why did the groups feel it was necessary to do this? Paul?
I'll jump in. And it started about 3 years ago when we noticed that students of color and low-income students with disabilities, and English learners were getting accepted into the state's regional vocational schools at lower rates than their more privileged peers. And we met for quite a number of times with the Massachusetts Department of Education. We talked to state board members, we talked with the Commissioner of Education, and we didn't make too much progress until we published the data about now 2 years ago. And in June 2021, the State Board made some very nominal changes, which we were opposed to because we said that they wouldn't make any difference. And lo and behold, yes, the subsequent year, not only were the discrepancies between kids from historically marginalized groups and their more privileged peers, they were wider than the year before. The board made the changes. So it was at that point we decided we're not getting any cooperation or collaboration or even understanding from the state level. So we had to take further action to hopefully press and force the state to make changes to create more equitable admissions for students from historically marginalized groups.
And the solution you are seeking is a lottery that would allow all 8th graders in a given regional school district to be placed in a lottery eligible for attendance of these schools, regardless of what their grades or attendance or discipline records are, Paul?
Yes, so long as they're promoted, and in being promoted, they've been deemed ready by their middle school, ready for high school. That would be the one basic requirement.
Okay, so we had at a meeting last December at which the Greater New Bedford Regional Voc-Tech School decided to go to a 50-50 system, 50% using their traditional admissions practices, and then another 50% using what they call an open lottery. But that open lottery would only be open to students with grades in core courses of 70% or better, attendance of no more than 10%, unexcused absences, and no major discipline problems. I'm taking it that you wouldn't think that would work. Can you talk to me about why that wouldn't work, Paul, again?
Well, you are still excluding some students, obviously. Those who don't meet those grades requirements, et cetera. And those students will be disproportionately students of color, English learners, students with disabilities, and students from low-income families, because students with those low grades are disproportionately members of those groups. Under civil rights laws, no criteria can be used that disproportionately exclude protected groups unless it's been demonstrated, the school demonstrates that those criteria have been validated as essential to participation. So, and I don't think that New Bedford has gone through that process. Being validated as essential to participation is a complicated term, but it basically means to prove it, not just assert it or think you have some reason that sounds like it's a good idea. You would have to prove that students with lower grades than that cannot succeed in a vocational technical high school, or in Greater New Bedford particularly.
And the position of the legal complaint is that anybody who has successfully completed 8th grade should be eligible, that by completion of 8th grade, you have demonstrated that you can do this work.
Yeah, now we think that's good policy for a number of reasons, which we can all go into. But in terms of the law, we don't think that New Bedford could meet that standard of showing that these students with low grades cannot succeed in New Bedford High. And Renee might want to talk about, we actually have an existence proof of a student who disproves that claim.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about that student in a bit. But first, Renee, I want to, you're on the ground in New Bedford. You work with the Shannon program with students with various challenges. What do you hear in the community about the differences that have grown up between Voc-Tech and New Bedford High School, which is the comprehensive high school?
Well, I've been hearing different things as the youth that graduate, the students that graduate from Voc-Tech, they have a higher college rate. I've been hearing things like the students that I work with are not eligible to get into Voc. And a lot of them want to. A lot of them are looking for that trade. So I hear a lot of different things from, I know the New Bedford Public Schools are starting to add some of those vocational education, I guess you would say, courses within the school. But we have a student that came from Shannon and came from New Bedford Public Schools and did not do well. We have a few, but this one in particular was not doing well academically or with his conduct, and is now, because of the lottery, a vocational Voc-Tech school student, and is excelling and doing well with B's and C's, and getting involved with extracurricular activities, not having behavior problems or truancy issues. And so I believe that the true model of the vocational technical schools works for youth that we work with, that struggle with academics.
Renee was nice enough to let me meet this student, and I interviewed him and wrote a column about him a few weeks ago. I was very impressed by him, and he specifically talked about being respected by teachers and also being stimulated by the sharp classes in a way that he wasn't by traditional academic classes. And I was hard pressed to figure out why he would not be eligible simply because in 8th grade his grades were not as good as somebody else's, or his attendance perhaps not either.
Right. So it's been very beneficial for him and for his family. I know they're very proud of him and what he's accomplished in his first year at Voc. And we have a couple of other students that got in through the lottery as well. Their grades weren't as bad, but they are excelling as well. And the whole point of vocational schools were to provide us with plumbers, electricians, tradesmen. And we're losing that with just focusing on college entrance.
This is a question for whoever wants to answer it. How do we know that it's the admissions policies that are keeping these kids out, and that it's just not the fact that they're not applying, or that somehow other kids, just are getting accepted? How do we know that these specific categories, people of color, English language learners, disabled students, are not getting in?
So I can speak to that. After the board, the state board changed the regs in June 2021, they asked all of the 28 regional vocational schools to resubmit revised policies. 27 of the 28 continue to have selective rank ordering criteria, and one, Aspet Valley Regional Voc-Tech, decided to go full lottery. Well, what happened is in the subsequent for this school year is that applications from students from historically marginalized groups, and particularly English learners, went up. And for English learners, it went up hugely. And as well, the acceptances, once kids had applied, were much more evenly distributed. There's still a little ways to go, but you could see that advancements were made towards greater equity in the school. At the same time, the rates for the gap rates, in other words, the differences between the percentage of kids who are accepted as students of color versus white, low income versus non-low income, students with disabilities versus non-disabled kids, and English learners versus non-English learners, the gaps increase statewide rather than get any better at the state level. So that gives us a little bit of proof that if you open things up to a lottery, that you get more kids who have been locked out of vocational schools applying and getting accepted.
Mhm.
So you have hard numbers that show that the numbers of kids in these protected categories applying and accepted are lower than the people in the non-protected categories, and that the trial programs that they did last year did not change it. I think in New Bedford, they have 565 kids at the Voc-Tech, and they had 65 in a lottery, and 500 were done by the traditional method, and it didn't change it. So you feel like you have the hard numbers.
And actually, the rates, the disparities went up for this pilot that Greater New Bedford allegedly ran. In other words, the gaps between students of color and whites are accepted at a 12 percentage point greater rate than students of color. Non-low income kids are accepted at a 25 percentage point difference than low income kids. Kids with disabilities are accepted at a 16 percentage point rate greater than non-disabled kids. Than disabled kids. And non-English learners are accepted at a 21 percentage point difference than English learners. In 3 of those categories, the rates went up from the prior year of 21-22.
Mm-hmm. Paul, Lexi, do you want to join in here about why we know it's the admissions policies?
Well, yes, we can't know exactly how many students would have applied if we didn't have these policies. Nobody's done a formal poll of that. What we do know with certainty is that the criteria being used disproportionately exclude.
Oops,
Oh,
the audio just dropped out there for a second. He was talking about how they know it, but I'll go to Renee. How bad is the problem in New Bedford? Is it worse than other parts of the state, or have you heard, whether it's the same, worse, any better?
Some of the things I've heard is it's about the same, depending on what city or which part of the state you're talking about. Some parts of the state are better and some parts aren't. New Bedford, we have a diverse population of Black, Brown, English language learners. And I mean, I think if we compare it to other places like Lawrence, we're kind of similar, depending on which city we're talking about. But I also think that we need to get away from having New Bedford Voc-Tech and New Bedford High School be known as competitives. It shouldn't be a competition between schools. What it should be is one complements the other. So the Voc-Tech school was built from I wasn't born back then, but it was built to create more jobs, to create less of disparities than we had at the time. It was built to provide trade opportunity for education and trades and fields, like, because we're always going to need a plumber, electrician, and engineer. We're always going to need that. Nurses, daycare workers. We're always going to need the different shops that they provide there. Auto mechanics. So I think that we as a city have got away from the purpose of the Voc-Tech schools, like I said. And I'm not saying that you can't go to college if you go to Voc. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is we should be producing more for the labor trade than we have, because we're at a shortage right now and it's affecting the economy. So if New Bedford Voc and New Bedford High work together, we can probably create something great in the city.
Some people have said, you just mentioned yourself, that New Bedford High School is beginning to adopt some of these career courses, these vocational courses. But I've also read that the vocational schools have a monopoly on some of the courses, and that you cannot teach some of the most popular trades like plumbing, electricians, auto mechanics at the other schools, because they have said that we have the only right to do that. And I've even heard some vocational administrators say you'll flood the market with too many people trained in these trades. Is that accurate, that they have a monopoly, Dan?
No, any public school district can apply to the state to become a Chapter 74 vocational program. Certainly the state takes into consideration other areas, but the main reason why they can't do it is because the expense of setting up the shop, and to do so they would have to get state approval, which gives you federal and state vocational funds. But no, there's nothing in state law that says that regional vocational technical schools have a monopoly over certain trade areas.
There is a recommendation that Massachusetts build more vocational schools to address the growing popularity of these career schools. In New Bedford, some have suggested having 2 vocational high schools. That doesn't sound like it would be anywhere near in time for kids that are coming through the system now. Do we need to build more vocational high schools?
Yeah, well, certainly there's 2 problems with vocational education in this state. One is there's not nearly enough seats for kids who want to go there. So there's huge waiting lists. At the same time, you're not doing any justice to kids of color, kids with disabilities, English learners, and low-income kids if all you do is expand the seats and don't deal with the current discriminatory selection process of kids. So it doesn't do well to just multiply the discrimination across the state. So at the same time, we need more vocational schools. We need vocational schools that have equitable policies and ensure that kids from historically marginalized groups have a fair shot at getting in. So the people who say that that we're going to flood the market, we have one contractor who is a business contractor who is in our coalition. She says she runs 30, and this is in Western Mass, so not near New Bedford, but she runs 30 teams of plumbers, electricians, and carpenters to do kitchen and bath remodeling. And she says she doesn't have one electrician, plumber, or carpenter under the age of 50. And she doesn't have one who is a person of color. So that right then and there shows there's a huge need to open up the pipeline of carpenters, plumbers, and electricians into the field in Massachusetts.
When could we expect the Office of Civil Rights to decide on the legal complaint? Because really, there are kids going through the New Bedford school system next year that unless I guess they won't change their policy by that time, but when could we expect a decision that would help kids who are being left out now?
Unfortunately, there's no way to answer that question.
Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, I missed space. It can take quite a long time. Sometimes it happens more rapidly than others. We think because of the what you just said, Jack, about the numbers of kids this affects, we hope that draws greater attention and resources, because obviously a lot is at stake in these kids' lives, and it's a lot of kids.
Yeah, Greater New Bedford is rejecting more than 400 kids a year that apply to go, and that's just the ones that apply, not even the ones that are discouraged from applying. So every year you have a lot of kids that aren't getting the opportunity.
What's distressing, Jack, is that we are making decisions that are lifetime decisions for 13 and 14-year-olds and holding them accountable for kid actions that they take, whether it be not getting to school enough or frankly having to drop their sisters, brothers off at school, having family obligations, or getting suspended once. We're making lifetime decisions. For kids who have means, they go on to college, which Renee talked about, that there's, but for kids who are from more low-income backgrounds, who don't see college as an opportunity because they don't have the funds to pay the tuition, that they're losing an opportunity to go straight into the trades and move to a more middle-class lifestyle.
Also, to some degree, this has gotten labeled as the coalition and others seeking to change or want to go back to the old voc-ed. And there is an old voc-ed that was very troubling. And that was one in which it was part of a tracking system in which kids were identified early on in their educational lives as being college material or not, and were shunted into very unequal tracks, and assumptions being made about kids' academic potential. And so this voc-ed was for kids who couldn't handle and wouldn't handle and didn't need much academics, and were good with their hands, not with their minds. These were the kids who were not going to be in decision-making positions in their work lives, et cetera. And we actually, our center actually played a significant role in challenging and changing that in federal policy with the help of Senator Kennedy, actually, to ensure that federally funded career and technical education programs had to integrate academic and vocational education at the same high level that all kids were expected to have, and were not simply being trained for one single job that might not be there in the future, whose skills would change, et cetera. And they had to also learn, in addition to technical skills, get experience and understanding of all aspects of an industry: planning, finance, management, labor, et cetera. And so breaking down that wall, that socioeconomic wall, as well as educational wall. And as a result of that, the academic quality of these schools has remarkably changed, and they've become very desirable. And there is, as Renee said, absolutely nothing wrong with kids, including kids who never aspired to college before because they had no success academically, kids going into these programs and schools and changing their aspirations, as well as entering programs that would lead to 2 more years of academics, college after high school, or even 4-year college programs. And all of that is wonderful. What is not wonderful is basically promoting the schools as academically successful by creaming who gets in the first place. And that's the issue here.
Right. I just want to add a little bit to that. And I think part of the problem is the kids get exposed to what careers they would like to enter into as early as elementary, right? And what do you hear people pushing? You want to be a doctor? That's all of us. We all do that. Do you want to be a lawyer? We push them towards that college track. And then when they get into middle school, they go on college tours. But have you ever heard of a school taking kids on tours with the plumbing industry? I don't know. I can't think of a business, or the Harvey Foundation, the Harvey Corporation. I'm just trying to think of trades, corporate businesses, or taking them down to the waterfront to see what they do there. I think they're not being exposed to those trades, so therefore it may not be of interest to them to apply to Voc because they don't know what that looks like. And a lot of our kids of color aren't even asked if they want to apply to Voc. There's not even an option for them to apply because of grades, absences. It may not be just behavior. It could be any 1 or 2 of those things. But I think we're also, as a city, as people in Massachusetts, are doing a disservice to our youth by not exposing them to different trades and different career patterns, like early childhood education. A lot of young people, if they don't go to Voc, I know New Bedford High has that component, but not everybody gets to go into that class. But how do you know you're interested in early education if you don't try it, right? How do you know you're interested in being a construction worker if you don't know what that looks like? A lot of kids say to me, well, I want to be a welder because that's where the money is. And then they end up doing something that's a labor, a job that involves labor, and find out they're not able to do that. So
even the kids who get into Voc-Tech, though, there are a
Mhm.
limited number of kids that get into each shop. And
Right.
I'm told that it's very common not to get into the shop that you want. It's not about being guaranteed that, right?
Right. It's competitive. That's competitive too.
Right.
Once you get in there, you have to, that's a lottery, right? They do that, and based off of your grades or attendance or conduct.
So one thing-
If I could just add one thing, Jack, on that. Our complaint also addresses that and challenges the admissions policies into specific programs, because they are typically also use criteria that disproportionately exclude students of certain groups. And so if we're successful, that too would be opened up to all, that choice of which program you get into once you're there.
So one thing I've heard around town, and I also heard this at the Voc-Tech School Committee, is that, well, why shouldn't we reward kids who've worked hard, gotten good grades, have good attendance, have not gotten into trouble? Why shouldn't they be able to go to the best high school? I've heard that, and I've also heard people want to get their kids away from New Bedford High School because they perceive there to be a lot of fights and gang activities. How would you respond to that? That what's wrong with rewarding kids who have worked hard to get into this school that offers these things that everybody wants?
Because if you're a kid who feels alienated by the high school, whether it's because of racial bias on the part of adults, kids, or for any reason that you don't get, learn, sitting at a desk and reading textbooks is not how you learn. And yet and so you don't do well in your courses, or you don't come to school some days. But that same kid might be taking apart his parents' car's engine and putting it back together again flawlessly. So just because you are not doing well at one school doesn't mean you can't work hard and do well at another. And we need to face the fact that the high schools that we have today are not working for a whole lot of kids. And those kids are usually disproportionately low income kids of color, students with disabilities, and English learners. And it's criminal that those kids then get excluded from an opportunity where they might excel. In fact, there's a reason why once kids are offered a seat at New Bedford Regional Voc-Tech and every single Voc-Tech around the state, it's the kids of color, the low-income kids, the students with disabilities, and the English learners who say yes at a far greater percentage than the more privileged kids. Those kids want to go there, and so they have incentive to do well.
Yeah, a fellow named James Sevens has written us in a question, and I think Renee addressed some of this earlier. They had heard that Voc-Tech is turning out less trade students and more college-bound students. That is in fact true in New Bedford, where Voc-Tech now has a higher percentage of kids going on to college than New Bedford High School does. Again, my question is, how do we address this quickly? Because I just, without a second vocational school, I just don't know how we're going to do it.
I think when I think about it, you asked me this question a few weeks ago as well. And as everyone's talking, when I think about it, there's 400 kids that aren't getting in the traditional way to the vocational school, maybe there should be a second school for those kids that are not getting in. I don't know. I didn't think there should be a second school because our area is so small, but maybe there should be a second school so that way, these kids are succeeding and they're not dropping out and they're not feeling like, a failure, because that's one of the things it does when kids don't get into Voc. They know that, okay, well, forget it, then I'm not even going to try doing anything else. I know some kids that haven't been to school since 8th grade. So it's kind of a catch-22. I think maybe having a second school may be an answer for those kids that aren't accepted to what they quote unquote consider. I mean, I feel like Voc is almost like an Ivy League school, like they're trying to turn it into an Ivy League school. But if they have another vocational school that those kids can filter into to be successful, then we would have, the economy would be better. We would have more of a equitable solution versus just saying, no, we can't help you. You're going to have to tough it out, or, go work somewhere else where you don't have a certification. So I don't know. When I think about it, maybe a second school might be good for those that
Have,
are
have
not
any,
getting affected in
have
today's.
any of you heard in your research come across anecdotes like the one I gave you about, and I've heard this personally, people telling me that I wanted my kid to be in Voc-Tech because I didn't want them to be at the fights that are at New Bedford High School or the gang activity. That's where the quote good kids go. Have any of you heard arguments like that?
I mean, I've heard it, especially in the field that I'm in. I've heard it a lot, but it doesn't matter what school you go to. I mean, Voc has its problems, and Bedford High has its problems. It's a small minority of students, a small group of students that may engage in that type of activity, but that doesn't make the whole school. So the people that say that, and I'm not trying to be funny, are white people. White people say that because they don't want their kids to be mixed in with a diverse group of other students. They don't want their white, privileged child to go to school with another Black child that may live in the projects. So to be honest, my feeling is it's not about that. It's about them not wanting their kids to be in a diverse group of
Yes, let's put that issue right on the table, the issue of racism. David Aaron's, a local activist who used to teach at the Bristol Plymouth, wrote you and me this afternoon, Renee, about anecdotes that he would hear when he was teaching up there of what we would describe as white flight, or kids from the white neighborhoods in cities trying to get their children away from the school where there was a large population of students of color. Is that an unspoken issue here, any of you? Racism?
I think it is. I mean, there's racism. I know a lot of people think it doesn't exist like it used to. It doesn't. It just looks different. It's just like, and I've used this analogy before, where you take your plate, and I remember my mother telling me I needed to eat more food on the plate, and I would move the food around on the plate to make it appear, the illusion that I ate some more of the food, but I really didn't. So that's what racism looks like right now. It looks like a plate of food where the food has been moved around, but it's still there. It still exists. It's just that looks differently, just like slavery looks differently. Oppression looks different. And it's something that people can't see. And living in Texas for 12 years and coming back home, experiencing true racists that are in your face. The one thing I can say about them is I respect the fact that they don't hide it. And here in Massachusetts, it's something that you can't see. It's invisible, but it's there. And you never know it's happening to you until it actually happens. So for me, the whole vocational admissions policy, whether or not a child goes to New Bedford High or goes to Voc, it's all based off of the systemic racism that people have been raised in. People are not racist because they are born that way. They're racist because they were taught racism. And so I think,
well, Dan, can you speak at all to the issue of racism in the way that the regional vocational schools are functioning?
Yeah, well, what we can say is that regional vocational schools, through their selective criteria, have gotten whiter, more English dominant. In other words, you don't have a diversity of English learners, with fewer disabled kids and fewer poor kids. So white parents, yes, they see that there's this opportunity here to go to this school where there's less diversity and my kid has a leg up. my kid will be able to hop over other kids, and it'll be attractive when they apply to a four-year college. So yes, racism is a factor in this whole equation.
When did this trend to less diversity start?
Well, so we went from one form of racism, which was when vocational education was inferior to academic college-bound education, to another form of racism, where once the quality of vocational education improved and its cachet in terms of future change, we have a different form of racism in which it's flipped, but it's still, as Renee said, it's just in a different form now, and you know, a lot of that had to do with these overall changes in career and technical education, along with MCAS, which was another factor in the schools, the career and technical schools wanting to control the admissions policy in order to ensure that their academic outcomes look good by picking students who are already succeeding. At the same time that they tout the fact, which is true, that good career and technical education enables students to achieve academically who were not achieving before.
Yeah, so
Jack, you asked when did it start? So it started in 2003. And the reason why is that was the very first year that the MCAS graduation requirement went into effect. And vocational schools were terrified that because of the kids who they enrolled at that time, which were much greater percentages of low-income kids, kids of color, etc., that they would be dinged as underperforming by the state because their kids would have a tough time passing MCAS. So they've lobbied very heavily to the State Board of Education, and the State Board ended up agreeing that they could, from there on, use selective rank ordering admissions requirements that basically excluded a whole lot of, and if that isn't part of racism, I don't know what is.
And it strikes me as interesting because they were concerned about the MCAS requirement, and they succeeded through their admissions policies, getting their MCAS numbers up at the expense of the comprehensive high schools whose MCAS success rate went down.
Absolutely.
Because kids that traditionally would have gone to the comprehensive high school, and you put them in the Voc-Tech high school, it's just breathtaking when you think of what's happened. I want to move on a bit and talk about something I came across in a legal complaint that I don't think I can articulate fully well, which is the Perkins Act violations. And one of you can correct me. As I understand it, the Perkins Act is federal money that is available to ensure that vocational education succeeds, but it comes with equal opportunity requirements, and there are some violations that you believe are going on with that too?
Yes, so those equal opportunity provisions in the Perkins Act don't just look at race, disability, gender, language. They look at other, quote, special populations, the largest one of which is low-income students. The core civil rights acts don't directly bar discrimination on the basis of family income, although obviously there are enormous disparities by race in family income. But the Perkins Act does. So there are provisions in that act that say schools have to seek to identify and eliminate barriers to equal rates of participation, as well as equal rates of success in career and technical education. and also provide requirements for special, for services and assistance and attention for members of special populations to achieve.
So you believe that there are violations of that going on? Do the low-income kids not get in simply because they're not applying? I've heard that in New Bedford, the mayor, who has been frustrated with the Voc-Tech's admissions policy, does not allow them to recruit and address the middle school kids anymore. I'm not sure that really works to help the situation any, but what are the reasons that the low-income kids are not?
Well, it's for the same reason. The criteria that are used, grades, discipline, attendance, as well as recommendations and interviews, but that's a more complex thing to get a handle on. We know that on those criteria, students of color, English learners, students with disabilities, and students from low-income families are disproportionately excluded by those criteria. They have, on average, lower grades, higher rates of absences, higher disciplinary incidents. So that's the core reason why. And that's the subject.
Well, and the fourth one, which you got the first three. The fourth one is guidance counselor recommendations. And in this state, you know, the guidance counselors are disproportionately white. So, and unfortunately, there's still bias within adult educators, and they tend to recommend more white kids than they do kids of color.
So the superintendent at GNB Voc-Tech has eliminated that recommendation of the guidance counselors from next year's. That's the one positive thing that I could see that you asked for, that they did there, but they did keep the grades and the attendance and the discipline requirements. Can you explain to me why having a lottery? One of the things the superintendent said was he wasn't sure the lottery would make the demographic spread any more equitable. Can you explain why you think that the lottery would make it more equitable?
Because it takes away so as Renee suggested, that there is a lot of kids who don't even apply. Why? Because teachers or the principal or the guidance counselors tell them you were suspended, you were this or that, your grades aren't good, you're not going to get in. Or they know, the kids know the criteria and they don't want to bother. They don't want to get a rejection. Who wants to be rejected? They want to know that they have a fair chance at getting in, and they know that they don't have a fair chance. So when you lift those selection criteria, as in Assabet Valley, more of those kids end up applying because they see, hey, maybe finally I have a fair chance at this. And Renee, you might want to speak to it.
But isn't demographically also, if you're letting everybody in the lottery, it just seems like the numbers would get a more of a spread than an admission requirement would.
Right, you'll have two things. One is with a lottery, every child who wants to go has an equal chance. Right now, students of color, et cetera, all those groups have a less than equal chance. And secondly, those groups, the students who are not succeeding in the regular public schools are disproportionately members of those groups. So they have that additional incentive to change to an educational setting where they are more likely to succeed. They have that incentive because they're not doing well and not, and not thriving in the setting they're in.
Renee, you should chime in.
Yeah, I was thinking about the young man that did get in through the lottery. And when he found out, like over the summer, and a young woman as well, when they found out that they were finally accepted, that changed everything for him. The way he behaved at home, his behavior in the community, went to school with a fresh start, because you know why? No one knew
Yep.
the things that happen in middle school.
It
He
gave
went
him a
there,
sense,
yeah,
gave him a sense of hope.
right, and that's what he said. He felt, like he had a chance now. He now has that opportunity. And so when we have these young people that are feeling hopeless, this is an opportunity. The lottery system is an opportunity for them to at least have some hope, to be able to get in. I think my only concern with the lottery system is because with anything, right? We don't know whose names they're putting in that lottery thing that they turn around. So it could also backfire, right?
Well, I
And
thought the lottery was supposed to put everybody in. No?
well, I haven't won the lottery yet. No, I'm
No, I
only
mean, the lottery for the Voc-Tech was supposed to put all the 8th graders
Yeah.
names in. Is that
right. But how do you ensure that? How do you make sure that that's really happening? Because this kid said to us, if you remember, Mr. Spillane, I feel like I hit the lottery.
Yes.
That's how he felt when he got chosen from the lottery. But what happens if there's 900 applicants, right? And they only put 700 in the lottery. What happens then?
So do
We
they,
don't know.
is the lottery that you're suggesting you still have to apply? Because I know that you guys at Shannon encouraged this kid to apply and some other kids too. Do you have to still apply, or does it put everybody's name in and then you opt out if you get in?
I think you have to apply, right? Am I right, Mr. French?
But
Right, you still have to apply.
it shouldn't be an extensive application. Just it would be a one sentence. I want to check. I want to attend Greater New Bedford Regional Voc-Tech next year.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they can't go to college either, because like they have the culinary program. The next step would be to go into BCC or Johnson and Wales and get into their culinary program. It's not saying that you can't be professionals, but the lottery would be for those that want to apply, like Mr. French said. And maybe it should be a box that says, are you interested in attending vocational technical high school?
But what about a kid that is so much adrift that he or she doesn't even know to apply, and yet if they did get in, they might really like it and might really benefit? I never understood this. They're 8th graders. They're not 18, 19 years old.
Right. I think that's up to the school to, and I think it's up to vocational school as well, to have assemblies where they are bringing and busing in all the 8th graders into the Voc-Tech schools so they can give them the information. And there's going to be kids that are like, I don't want that, but then there's going to be kids that really do want that. Especially once they see the school. The school's beautiful, and they have a lot to offer, and I know that the teachers there are really invested in a lot of these young people, whether they qualify, whether they don't. I know some of the teachers are fighting for the same things, but I think if the school system was able to work together, like I said earlier, and not compete, but to collaborate so they can complete each other, complete the system. I think that would work if they brought every single 8th grader at different times into the school, gave them the same information. If you are interested, we're going to hand you a packet with all the shops that are listed. We want you to check off, are you interested in the school, and what shop would you be interested in if you were? So that way it gives them a sense of how many young people would want to go. And they can't let everyone in, right? Because they only have so many seats. And I get that, but at least open it up a little bit so that way kids actually feel like, okay, even though my grades are like this, my behavior is like this, I still have an opportunity to turn it around, to go to school and like the young man said, and win the lottery myself.
Okay. So we're wrapping up our hour here. So I want to offer each of you an opportunity to make some closing remarks. And the only question that I would put out there is where do we go from here? We're waiting for the Office of Civil Rights to make this decision, but every year kids are coming through the system. Where do we go from here? Why don't we start with Paul?
Well, there is the potential for other remedies. The legislature, there are members of the legislature, including Mr. Cabral, who are pushing for legislative reform, which could come as quickly as the legislature can move when it wants to. So that's one thing. And I guess the other thing I would close with is on this discussion of more seats, more schools, more seats versus reforming the current policy. You know, it takes us back to those issues of race and scarcity. Where we have scarcity, we have unequal access traditionally in our society in the absence of really, really strong policy. If we open up the admissions policy so everybody has an equal chance, then people whose voices are more likely to be heard will scream louder about their kids not getting in, and that is probably a useful prod to developing more capacity instead of doing it the other way around and focusing on the capacity to the exclusion of dealing with the equity.
And so we have about 3 or 4 minutes left. Deanne, what would you like to wrap up for your closing remarks?
Well, as Paul suggested, we need to work at all fronts. This issue isn't going to go away, and it's clear that the state is not interested in remedying the situation. So the pressure has to come from the legislature. We are meeting we've met with the Attorney General's office. We're meeting with the Secretary of Education in a few weeks. We need to pursue the federal complaint, and we need to continue the grassroots support, which, you know, Renee is helping lead in New Bedford, and we need to do it in every district around the state to keep this a public issue.
And Renee, what would you like to emphasize as we wrap up?
I just want to add that anyone that's out there watching, listening, if you're a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, a cousin of a young person that would like to get into Voc, email your state representative, email the Secretary of Education. We as people, as citizens, have to be actively involved in what we want. If we want to make a change, we have to be the change that we want to make and that we want to see. That's the only thing I can say. Just please, I'm asking people to, if you want to see your child get into the vocational school and they are interested, you have to get involved. So.
Well, thank you all so much for taking part in this chat. I think this issue of the divide in vocational education is so important, and maybe the most important issue facing education right now in Massachusetts and in New Bedford. And I think we've learned a lot tonight, and there's so much more we can talk about. So thank you for starting us off on this, and we'll hope to talk to you again.
Great. Thank you very much, Jack, for hosting.
Thanks for opening this up. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all.